This next video is how to line your A-line baby doll dress, or how to make it up completely actually, but I have a good bit done and it's really down to lining the neckline, and the binding is what we now need to do. So what I've got done so far, it's all the stuff you know how to do anyway. I have my zip in, as I showed you on the video for inserting the invisible zip using the zipper foot. I also have my side seams pressed, sewn up and pressed flat. I've got my bust darts in, my waist darts in on the back, and I have the same done on my lining. So basically my lining is made up, my zip is in, my dress is made up as far as the side seams, and really all we have to do now is actually finish off the armholes and the neckline. So sorry, I know sometimes I tend to go quite quick, so just to explain again what I've done. So this is the dress so far, okay? So side seams are done, centre back seam is done with my zip, my darts are done, okay? And then similarly on the lining, I've sewn up my centre back seam as far as my notch for my zip, my darts are in, my side seam is done, and I have my fusing on my neck and my armholes, and my bust darts are done. And actually just another little tip that I did on this one, which is just a nice clean way of doing your side seams when you have a dart, is actually sew the dart out first, just to show you what I did. So I sewed out my dart first and then I overlocked, and it just makes it a lot cleaner and flatter. And it's also less bulky because you have only one layer of overlocking here as opposed to 3. So it's just a nice clean way, and it's also a good way of not losing your notches, because sometimes after you've overlocked it can be hard to see your notches. So if you actually sew out your dart first and then overlock, it's kind of a handy little tip for you. Okay, so basically the next thing we need to do is attach the lining and the fabric around the armholes. So I've turned my dress right side out, okay, and then my lining is wrong side out, okay, and then I'm going to basically slip the dress up inside the lining, and I'm going to open the zip. Okay, so there we have it, right side of dress and now right side of lining are getting pinned together, okay. So we're using binding around this neckline. So for the moment I'm just literally going to put a pin there to hold it in place, but we won't be stitching the neckline yet. We're concentrating on the armholes at the moment. So as always I like to start underneath the arm, pin in place, and then as you can see the benefit of having this fused will hold this in place, because obviously the fabric could now stretch a wee fraction, so it's important to let the fusing on the lining dictate the length of that armhole. Okay, and then pin up the front armhole, and same thing, don't be tempted to stretch the fabric, let it just sit nicely against the fused lining. And the same on the other armhole. So under pressing is so important, just makes all of this go together much neater as well, because some of these bits you wouldn't be able to get back into after you have it made up. So it's really important to under press properly. It's the only way you could get a good clean finish. So just pin everything. And then I'm going to stitch around each armhole, and then I'll show you how to do your back row, and then all we'll have left to do is the binding on the neckline. Okay. So I have 1 centimetre seam allowance on my armhole. I find it's plenty. 1.5 for me is too much in a curved seam, so I only have to take off 1 centimetre seam allowance. Always starting off with your back tack. and taking care not to stretch that seam as you work your way down. I find as well it's better to keep the fused layer on top, because naturally the feeder of the sewing machine will help ease in the layer that's not fused and will avoid it stretching. So I'm just working around underneath the arm here, taking care to turn the fabric nicely and not stretch, and then back up. Usual, trimming off your threads as you go. So important to keep your work nice and neat. So as you can see, when I get to this corner here, you know, where it's quite angled, I'm making sure that this is all sitting nice and flat before I even try and stitch around. And I'm constantly feeling what's going on underneath to make sure that there's no, I'm not sewing a tuck in by mistake or something like that. So next we need to snip into those curved seams, okay? Move that back so you'll be able to see. So we snip in to that curved seam underneath the arm, because if we didn't, when we would go to turn that through, it would be all puckered. So just at the very curved section, especially down there at the underneath armhole point. And now we're going to turn the whole dress through the right way. There's my lining all pulled out. Okay, there's my underneath seam. And just for the purpose of you to see, so you can see where we are again. There's the front of the dress. Armhole is now finished off. And the same on the back. So there's the actual armhole there. And this neckline part here, we'll be finishing off with binding. Just before we get to that, I'm going to do my back row here along my lining, because as you know, I'm a big fan of back rows. So I'm just going to pull the lining back out again from inside the dress and pop it underneath. Flip my seam allowance so that it's sitting out onto the lining. Pop it under the machine, and about 2 or 3 mil in from the edge, you want a little line stitching. And as you go, make sure to pull that open. But at the same time, feeling constantly that underneath your seam allowance is facing onto the lining. Because really what you're doing is you're sewing the seam allowance and the lining together, and that'll just help everything sit correctly. And it gives a lovely finish. And you will be able to go the whole way around in one go. Sometimes you have to do it in 2 goes, depending on what you're doing. And there you have it, a nice neat back row. So it means that when we go to press that, there's no way your lining will pop out onto the right side of the garment. it's going to really stay pressed perfectly along there. So I'll come back in the next part and do the binding on the neckline.